Hello, my name is Gopala Vasudevan, and today we will talk about the time value of money. This is one of the most important chapters as far as this course is concerned, and even from a practical point of view, a lot of the things that we do are related to this. So chapter 5 and 6, if you take finance, that's very important. If you don't take finance, I think a lot of the things we do in practice, in your everyday life, come from the time value of money. So what are some of the examples? So let's say you don't take any more finance. Chances are you have to buy a house. And when you buy a house, some of the things you want to look for are how much house can I afford? What is the most I can pay per month? What are going to be my monthly payments? And so on. You might want to buy a car. And again, when you buy a car, you have to make some choices. What are the payments, monthly payments going to be? Or what is the most car I can afford? Or should I lease the car? These are some examples. And a third example is all of us want to retire at some point in time. And when you talk about saving for retirement, if let's say as an example, I want to have $1 million when I retire at age 55. So given the target, how much should I save every month? That's one example. Other examples are you might have a kid, you want to save for college. Again, how much would I save every month? So all these are applications of the time value of money. So as far as this chapter is concerned, what are some of the things we want to do? First is compute the future value of an investment made today. So present value means that how much it is worth in today's dollars. Future value means how much it is worth at a later point in time. Be able to compute the present value of cash to be received at some future date. So let's say you are buying a bond or somebody promises you $1,000 in 1 year. How much is it worth today? That is the present value. Be able to compute the return on an investment. So as an example, when you buy a bond, let's say you pay $800, you get a certain payment every year, and then you get back $1,000. So what you're looking for is how much am I making on my investment? Be able to compute the number of periods that equates a present value and a future value given an interest rate. So essentially, you might be trying to figure out how many years it takes to end up with $1 million and so on. Be able to use a financial calculator and a spreadsheet to solve time value of money problems. So I definitely say that you cannot do the problems by hand or even with a regular calculator. So you want to be comfortable either using a financial calculator or using an Excel. If you are doing it at home, it might be a good idea to use Excel because, if you want to continue in finance, that's a good tool to learn. Okay. So this is like the introduction to the time value of money. I think this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It lets you use the financial calculator or Excel, gives you an introduction. And chapter 6 I think is a little more advanced. Okay? So you want to make sure you're comfortable with Excel or financial calculator using the problems in this chapter. You can also go to my courses and download the questions and answers I have posted there. You should also try to do that. So here we talk about future value and compounding, present value and discounting. We'll also talk about present value and future values. So what is the basic definitions here? The present value, earlier money on a timeline. So typically when you talk about present value, what we are doing is that how much is it worth in today's dollars. What about future value? Future value basically tells you how much it is worth at a later point in time. So for example, you are trying to save for retirement, you're putting aside $1,000 every month, you want to figure out how much you have at age 55. That's an example of a future value. Now interest rate, exchange rate between earlier money and later money. So interest rate basically tells you how much you are actually paying to borrow the money or how much you are actually making on your investment. What are some of the other names we see here? Some examples are discount rate, the cost of capital, the opportunity cost of capital, and the required rate of return. So these are all examples of the interest rate. So The cost of capital is typically the interest rate for a firm. So a firm might have different types of securities outstanding: debt, equity, convertible debt, preferred stock, and so on. So the cost of capital basically tells you on average how much it is paying for every dollar raised. Opportunity cost of capital is another name, and the required rate of return on investment. Those are all examples of the interest rate. So let's look at some very simple basic problems. Suppose you invest $1,000 for 1 year at 5% per year. What is the future value in 1 year? So we know that we can make 5% interest. We have $1,000. So what is the future value? The future value would be equal to the $1,000 you invest times 1 plus the interest rate. So that's what we see here. $1,000 times 1.05, you end up with 1,050. So $1,000 is the principal amount, $50 is the interest. Suppose you leave the money for another year, so the future value in 2 years is going to be the $1,000 you invest today. At the end of the year, you have 1,050. If you keep it for 1 more year, you end up with $1,102.50. So basically here, what is the general formula? The future value is the present value, or how much we are investing, multiplied by 1 plus the interest rate raised to t, where r is the interest rate and t stands for the time period. Now typically, before financial calculators became very popular, people usually talk about the future value interest factor. So what is the future value interest factor? That tells you the future value of $1. So 1 plus r raised to t gives you the future value interest factor. Now effects of compounding: simple interest, compound interest. So consider the previous example. Future value with simple interest is $50 every year. So in the case of simple interest, what we are assuming is that you only get interest once, and it's going to be the same interest. On the other hand, when you talk about compound interest, you are getting interest on interest. So if you're getting simple interest, you would end up with 1,100. If you're getting compound interest, you end up with 1,102.50. So it makes a big difference when you are staying invested for a long period of time. Now you definitely want to be comfortable with the calculator. Now the textbook emphasizes the TI BA2 plus. Perhaps the main reason why they do that is because it's simple and it's cheap. It's not very expensive. And if you want, you can also download the emulator. So on your smartphone, whether that's an iPhone or whether it's an Android phone, chances are you can download the emulator. So once you download the software, your phone becomes a financial calculator. Okay, that's something you want to take a look at. So what is the with the TI BA2 plus, FV stands for the future value, PV stands for the present value, I-Y stands for the interest rate per period, N is the number of periods, and you want to make sure you clear the registers. Okay. So suppose you invest the 1,000 from the previous example for 5 years, how much would you have? So there are 2 ways you can do that, and one is the $1,000 you invested times 1.05, okay, 1.05 raised to 5. That is one way to do that. With your financial calculator, basically there are 1, 2, 3, 4 variables. One of them is missing, and here the missing one is the future value. So the first variable is $1,000, that is the present value. The second is 5, that is the interest rate per year, and 5 is also the number of years. Then you get the future value to be $1,276.28. Suppose you had a relative deposit $10 at 5.5% interest 200 years ago. How much would the investment be today? So 200 is N, 5.5 is interest rate per year, 10 is the present value. The future value would be 447,189.84. Now the future value is a negative sign. You don't really have to worry about that. Okay. Now suppose future value as a general growth formula. Suppose your company expects to receive increased unit sales of widgets by 15% per year for the next 5 years. if you sell 3 million widgets in the current year, how many widgets do you expect to sell in the 5th year? So 3 million is the present value. The interest rate is 15%. The number of years is 5. You want to find out the future value. And here, the future value is 6,034,072. So although we are not talking about interest rates, we are talking about a company. We are talking about how much they would sell in year 5. So we talked about the future value. How do we do the present value? So both of these are very much related. So the future value is the present value times 1 plus r raised to t. Now how do you figure out the present value? The present value is the future value divided by 1 plus r raised to t. So whenever we are talking about future value, finding the future value, that process is called compounding. When you talk about finding the present value, that is referred to as discounting. Suppose you need 10,000 in 1 year for the down payment on a new car. If you can earn 7% annually, how much do you need to invest today? So 10,000 is the future value. The interest rate is 7%. So the 10,000 divided by 1.07, that gives you the present value. Now if you want to do the same thing for 2 years, what happens? The present value is given by the 10,000 divided by 1.07 raised to 2. Okay, so the difference is that now we want to raise it to the power of 2, and if you want to use a financial calculator, the only number that changes is n becomes 2, and you will find that the present value becomes a little bit smaller. You want to begin saving for your daughter's college education, and you estimate that she will need $150,000 in 17 years. If you feel confident that you can earn 8% per year, how much do you need to invest today? So the $150,000 you need in year 17 is the future value. The interest rate is 8% per year, and you want to find out the present value. So the future value is 150, and the number of years is 8, 17, the interest rate is 8, you want to find out the present value. Or we can also say that the present value is given by the 150,000, okay, divided by 1.08 raised to 17. That should give you the same answer. Okay, now as I told you, these are simpler problems you can do without a calculator, but in chapter 6 especially, it becomes a lot more complicated. Okay, your parents set up a trust fund for you 10 years ago that is now worth 19,671.51. If the fund earns 7% per year, how much did your parents invest? So this is, in this case, what you're trying to do here is that you want to find out the present value. You know that the future value is 19,671.51. The number of years is 10. The interest rate per year is 7. And you can find out the present value. Again, you can just take the 19,671.51, divide that by 1.07 raised to 10. That should give you the same answer. So what are some of the things we see here as far as concepts are concerned? For a given interest rate, the longer the time period, the lower the present value. So the longer you have to invest, the less money you need today. Okay, so what is the present value of 500 to be received in 5 years, 10 years? The discount rate is 10%. So for 5 years, the present value is 310. For 10 years, the present value is 192.77. So what is the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that you don't want to wait too long. You want to start saving as soon as possible. Okay. For a given time period, the higher the interest rate, the smaller the present value. So if you can invest at a higher rate, you need to have less money. What is the present value of 500 received in 5 years? If the interest rate is 10%, 15%. So at 10%, the present value is 248.59. At 10% is 310.46. At 15%, it is 248.59. 0.59. So what we find is that the higher the return on investment, the less money you want to have. What is the relationship between present value and future value? So these are reciprocal. Okay. So present value is future value divided by 1 plus r raised to t. So with a financial calculator, we have 4 variables and typically 3 of them are given to you. You're trying to solve for the 4th one. The discount rate, often we will want to know what the implied interest rate is on investment. So there, the discount rate is given by the future value divided by present value raised to 1 by t minus 1. So starting from here, I think it's a lot easier to use the financial calculator. Okay. You are looking at an investment that will pay $1,200 in 5 years. If you invest $1,000 today, what is the implied rate of interest? So we can either use it the mathematical way, 1,200 divided by 1,000 raised to 1 by 5 minus 1, that gives you 3.7, or we can say that the present value is the minus 1,000, the future value is the 1,200, the number of years is 5. You want to find out the interest rate. So one thing you want to be careful about is that you want to make one of them to be negative. So here typically we put the present value as a negative number because it's like an investment. Suppose you are offered an investment that will allow you to double your money in 6 years. You have $10,000 to invest. What is the implied rate of interest? So the number of years is 6. The present value is 10,000. The future value is 20,000. You want to find out the interest rate per year. That's 12.25%. Okay. Suppose you have a 1-year-old son and you want to provide 75,000 in 17 years. You currently have $5,000 to invest. What interest rate must you earn to have the 75,000 when you need it? So the number of years is 17. The future value is 75,000. The present value is 5,000. The interest rate is going to be compute 17.27. Okay. Now, what are some situations in which you might want to know the implied interest rate? You are offered the following investments. You can invest 500 today and receive 600. The investment is low risk. You can invest the 500 in a bank account paying 4%. What is the implied rate for the first choice? And which investment should you choose? So basically, when you're comparing investments, you want to find out how much you are making when you invest at for 5 years $500 and receive 600 in 5 years. Okay, and you want to pick the investment that is giving a higher return. Now, how do you find out the number of periods? So start with basic equation, solve for t. T is given by the natural logarithm of future value over present value divided by the natural log of 1 plus r. So here I think it's a lot easier to use the financial calculator. You want to purchase a new car and you are willing to pay 20,000. If you can invest at 10% per year and you currently have 15,000, how long will it be before you have enough money to pay cash for the car? So here you're trying to figure out the number of years. So the future value is 20,000. The present value is how much you have. You want to make it a negative 15,000. The interest rate per year is 10. And the number of years is 3. Okay, that gives you the number of years. Suppose you want to buy a new house. You currently have 15,000 and you figure you need to have a 10% down payment plus an additional 5% of the loan amount for closing cost. Assume the type of house you want will cost about $150,000 and you can earn 7.5% per year. How long will it be before you have enough money for the down payment and closing cost? Okay, so it's a little bit confusing because we are not too familiar with closing cost. So the main thing here is that you have to remember that you have $15,000. You want to buy a house for $150,000 and the closing costs are going to be 10%. So you pay closing cost. These are the cost of the lawyer, of the appraiser, then the bank does a credit check. So all of these cost money, and we are saying that is 10% of the loan amount. So the house is worth $150,000. You are putting down $15,000. The key is that you are paying the closing cost only on the $135,000, not on the $150,000. So down payment is 15,000. The closing costs are 6,750. Total amount needed is 21,750. So you want to figure out the number of periods. The number of periods is going to be the present value is minus 15,000. So be careful about that. Make sure it's a negative number. The future value is 21,750. The interest rate is 7.5 and N is going to be 5.14 years. So you have to save for 5.14 years to end up with the 21,750. Okay. So basically here, this is like a quick quiz. When might you want to compute the number of periods? So you want to figure out how long it takes for you to end up with a certain amount of money. That is when you want to find out compute the number of periods. So you know the present value, you know how much money you have, you know the future value, you know how much money you need. You're trying to figure out the number of periods. Suppose you want to buy some new furniture for your family home. You currently have 500 and the furniture you want costs 600. If you can earn 6%, how long will you have to wait if you don't have any additional money? So this is just one example. Okay. Now what we have here is we have some examples of using the spreadsheet. Now you can use some of these to do the problems, or on my courses again I have posted some spreadsheets for different types of problems. You could use that, but you definitely want to make sure you're comfortable with using the Excel. So how do we find out the future value? So the future value is given by the interest rate, the number of periods, the payment, and the present value. The present value is given by the rate, number of periods, the payment, and the future value. The rate, that is the interest rate, how do you find out? The number of periods, payment, present value, and the future value. And the number of periods is given by rate, payment, present value, and future value. So again, what we are doing here is that we have 5 variables. These are the future value, the present value, the interest rate, the number of periods, and the payment. One of them is missing and we are trying to find that. So if you look at this, you have $10,000 to invest. You need the money in 5 years and you expect to earn 8% per year. How much will you have in 5 years? So what we are doing here is that we are computing the future value. And how do we compute the future value? The future value is given by the interest rate. So the interest rate is 8%. The next is the number of periods. Okay, the number of periods is 5. 0 is the payment, and then we have the present value, which is 10,000. So that's what we did here. The missing number was the future value, and we were able to find the future value. Now, suppose we want to find out the number of periods. How do we do that? So to find out the number of periods, that is going to be the interest rate, okay, the payment, the present value, and you want to make sure that you put a negative sign for the future value. Otherwise, you get an error message. Okay? So this is what you want to do. You definitely want to make sure you download it and use it to practice. So many financial calculators are available online, and okay, you can use that. And in this case, if you go back, you need 50,000 in 10 years. If you can earn 6%, how much do you need to invest today? So how do we do that? The future value is 50,000. Okay. The number of years is 10. I is 6. Payment is 0. And you want to find out the present value. So what we are trying to do here is we want to find out the present value. And if you do that, the present value you get is $27,919.74. So this summarizes the formulas. I think it's more important to make sure you're comfortable with the calculator or Excel. Okay. And I'd also encourage you to go back and to my courses and review the problems we did. Okay, because that's a way, that way you can get some hands-on experience.